Professor of International Law, Lauri Mälksoo. Lauri, please. I know that you are an international lawyer, but you wrote in your profile that you are just an international lawyer interested in theory and history of Eastern Europe and Eurasia. But today you will talk about these international organizations. What a complicated topic, right?
Yes, international. Thank you so much, Kadri. Okay. International organizations, but also what this power struggle, what has been discussed here today, these shifts in international power, what they mean for international rules. Because there is currently a widely shared sense that this will have obviously implications also based on what rules these kind of economic competition will be played out for between Russia and China, especially China and the United States in that context. But in order to approach this theme, I want to very briefly zoom in based on the history. So in a way, when we talk about the world order, it is created, the contemporary phase of it, after World War II. So 1945, and there are two aspects to it. There is this security aspect, which is the United Nations Charter, adopted in 1945, and then you have those Bretton Woods institutions, as well as later the World Trade Organization, previously GATT, basically the economic side of globalization. And since the end of the 90s, there was strongly this feeling that everything with globalization means that there will be more universal norms, and they will be the stronger. For instance, when the World Trade Organization was created based on previous GATT, one main element of it was the sort of juridification of world trade. With the dispute settlement system in Geneva, the dispute settlement body and the appellate body, it was made almost quasi-judicial, as if trade, the conditions of trade would not be political or a matter of diplomacy as well, but simply an application of rules. And China was included in that system in 2001. And now, if you look at the debates in the United States, there is almost like a regret that basically the United States, by including China so favorably in the world trade system, has facilitated the economic rise of China. And there is a certain setback, especially in the rules of international trade, I think, compared to the time of optimism when China was included. There is a little bit more diplomacy and politics in this trade system now in the interpretation of those trade rules, mutual trade conditions, compared to this initial phase after the creation of World Trade Organization. And one indication has been the US reluctance to appoint, to kind of US blocking of the appointment of members to this quasi-judicial dispute settlement appellate body. Now, in international economic affairs, of course, the main question of international rules, of international law, the question of security, of war, will play a major role. So all these economic agreements and rules can also be messed up and blown in the air if there is a major war. We see it in Ukraine, the war against Ukraine, Russia's aggression in Ukraine has of course had a tremendous impact on the economic performance of that victim of aggression. My sense of the history of rules as they are applicable to international economic activities is that when we take a deeper look at the history, then we see that these super successful universal rules in international economic law are almost an exception to these times when international law has been also to an important extent regional. I mentioned the Bretton Woods institution. Think about the Cold War. There was, of course, everybody talked about international law, but the Soviet Union was not part of this of the system of Bretton Woods institutions. So in most times in international law in the past, there has been a significant amount of regionalization as well. For example, the very mentioned Soviet Union spoke a lot about socialist international law as something peculiar for its own sort of sphere of influence countries. One last point concerns the international investment law. This is an area of international rules and international law that many would agree have been made at the time when the Western dominance over capital and investments was quite strong, absolute, earlier decades in the 20th century. And now we have a kind of revenge of history that we can see that China has become an investor. And now some of the Western countries also get the sense of how does it feel to be with those rules that were worked out in the past, with those principles that are largely protective of investments. How does it feel to be on the receiver's end of those? And therefore, also in terms of international rules in their interpretation, we are living at the time of change, when in some context you have a backlash to universal rules, but in some other contexts it's not longer be only the Western countries who will be the beneficiaries of those universal rules. And one response, maybe sometimes led by the very Western countries that in the past promoted universal rules, will also be some sort of regionalization, or in international trade, anyway, in international investment, the relations, also rules are very much bilateral, based on bilateral treaties, but there are certain signs of backlash in that field as well. So, for example, recently some Western countries have announced that they are no longer interested in Energy Charter Treaty, which is one of the major multilateral investment protection treaties. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.